Hello, Cape Crusaders. Please join me in welcoming a very special guest. His credits include writing for shows such as Gargoyles, Extreme Ghostbusters, The Mummy, Transformers Prime, X-Men the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Spider-Man the Animated Series, and of course, Batman the Animated Series. I don't think I've ever said animated series so many times in my life, but please welcome Robert N Skir. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing terrific. How about yourself?
I'm great. Thanks for coming on the show. It's nice to see you again. As mentioned, you've written for Spider-Man, the Animated Series, and all of our listeners know me and my brother also do a Spider-Man podcast. And if you go back and check out episode 65, all the way back in August of 2020, Robert came on that episode to talk about The Sting of the Scorpion and Turning Point. But today we're going to be talking about Batman and the 3 episodes that you penned for that show or co-wrote with Marty Eisenberg, right?
Yes. My then writing partner, yes, we were invited to write 3 episodes. I always preface whenever I talk about Batman, the Animated Series, I always begin with the same spiel. And so here it is. That series is, to me, the definitive Batman. They distilled everything that made Batman wonderful into one single place. Because of when they did it and how they did it, they didn't feel the need to change it around and redefine things and do things like making Alfred a secret agent and co-hero. They just did Batman. And they did, I'm going to say, around 95 episodes total. My partner and I were hired to write 3. So whereas I am incredibly proud of the work that I did on the show, and I was really, really blessed to have gotten to contribute to it, I can't claim any kind of ownership over the show. So it's, I refer to it as, my series or, whatever. There are people who are like the authors of that series. And it's kind of like they had an incredible party and they invited us to come in. So I'm very grateful to the story editors I work with. I'm very grateful to Alan Burnett. I can't overclaim on Batman. I can just say I wrote 3 episodes that I thought came out fantastic on a series that presented us with the definitive take on Batman.
You really did. And I'd love to talk about your time at this party because those 3 episodes are his Silicon Soul, What is Reality, and Lockup. So just like when we were chatting about Spidey, the same question I have for all of our writer guests is, how did you get the gig writing for Batman, the Animated Series?
We were very lucky to be in the right place at just the right time. Marty was working for an executive named Sidney Iwanter, and I'm going to talk about Sidney for a second here. Sidney was an executive at Fox Kids. When Fox Kids was just starting, it was this incipient thing, and they were in offices, like they were like Bear. They just had moved in, and it was just starting from the ground up. And Marty was invited. Well, he was hired as an office temp to be Sidney's assistant, and he was reading scripts and looking at storyboards. And Sidney is an incredible guy, incredible human being. And he asked Marty, "So, kid, what do you really want to do?" Which is how he talks. Right. But he's got an incredible heart. And Marty's like, "Well, I want to write." He says, "Well, kid, if you want to write, then you got to read a bunch of scripts. You got to look at these storyboards. You got to, take a look at this stuff." And
he sounds like a real J. Jonah Jameson type.
Well, it's kind of like having a coach. He's kind of like a football coach, no matter which kind of football you're talking about. So first series they wanted to do, they called Project X. It was called Project X because they didn't want Disney knowing that they were doing a series based on Peter Pan, because Peter Pan was theirs. They had a Peter Pan. It was definitive. They had a Tinkerbell. That's the only Tinkerbell ever. And they hired people from UCLA, professors. One of them was an animation professor named Dan McLaughlin, and one was a critical studies professor named Howard Suber. And Dan McLaughlin was there to make sure that things didn't look the same as Disney, because Disney would be like, "Hey, wait, that's our Peter Pan," which is why Peter Pan wears brown as opposed to green. And the writer, Howard Suber, was there to make sure that it's like, well, okay, you can't make the crocodile big and jolly and happy because that's Disney's. That's original with Disney. So if we do that, Disney's going to be like, "Hey, you're taking our stuff." So they made sure that their Peter Pan was going to be unimpeachable by Disney's attorneys. And so that was their way of going head to head. That was the shot across, the the shot across the bow. So Sidney was in charge of that series. And then he was in charge of developing several other series like Eat the Cat and things like that. But Beetlejuice landed on his lap. And then after Beetlejuice, he was developing Batman and then X-Men. So where Marty and I came into it was Marty was there working as an assistant. And he was reading all these Peter Pan scripts and looking at all the stuff. And we came up with 3 stories for Peter Pan. And they were incredible. They were just so fantastic that Sidney passed on all of them. And I'm like, well, I guess we're not going to get to write the cartoons. So, about a year later, 6 months later, sometime later, they were doing Beetlejuice. And the Beetlejuice cartoon was on ABC. And it was just this silly little thing where, you're in Peaceful Pines and,
I remember, man. They made the animated series out of any movie or franchise film, like Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, a lot of Jim Carrey stuff, actually. Anything like that from the 90s, they would make into an animated series.
They did shit based on Mr. T.
Yeah, you wrote for the Mask. You wrote for the Mask, right? Like they even did a Mask show, another Jim Carrey movie. Yeah.
They did. So Marty's like, hey, we're doing Beetlejuice. Do you want to, come up with some ideas for Beetlejuice? And I'm like, no. Because I was writing screenplays. I got a degree. I got a master's degree in screenwriting, and I was writing screenplays. And Marty got a master of professional writing from USC, and he was writing screenplays. And we liked writing together. We had very much the same sensibilities, and also we complemented each other. By which I mean, I really loved Universal horror, and I loved superheroes, and I loved all that kind of stuff. He really loved the Marx Brothers and comedy and things like that. So whereas our tastes were the same, we came from different directions so that we each, whatever you wanted, the 2 of us were there. We could do it. So Marty's like, hey, let's write and I'm like, I don't want to write cartoons. Okay. Cartoons suck. But meanwhile, like Tiny Toons had just emerged and The Simpsons had just emerged, and suddenly animation became interesting. And a couple of years before that, Ralph Bakshi had done a Mighty Mouse series that was just off the hook amazing.
I watched that as a kid. That was like one of the first cartoons I ever watched. It was great.
That was the best because it was just irreverent and weird and wacky. And Marty's like, well, yeah, I'm like I didn't come here to write shitty cartoons because I wasn't going to write the Happy Clowns of Happy Town or the Moo Cows of Moo Mesa or whatever the fuck. That's not what I came out here to do. And Marty's like, no. They want to do Beetlejuice differently from the ABC show. They want to just do everything in that weird surreal world, kind of like, when Porky was in Wacky Land. They want to do it irreverent like the old Warner Brothers cartoons. And so I struck a deal with Marty. I said, listen, if we're just gonna write cartoons and waste the time of 9-year-olds 30 minutes at a time, I'm out. That's not what I was put on this earth to do. But if we're going to write at the top of our intelligence, if we're going to write to make each other laugh, if we're going to take this seriously, if we're going to take the writing as seriously as we took that screenplay that we wrote, if we're going to fight about things because they matter, then I'm in.
Right.
And he's like, that's how we're going to do it. So and a lot of fighting ensued. But our gig was we were going to take this writing seriously. And so we pitched a couple of Beetlejuice episodes. It was very late in the series. We were lucky to get 1 or 2. We wound up writing 7 out of 65.
Wow.
Which was incredible. But we became like the go-to fix-it guys. They give us episodes that they were going to kill. And every one of them got made because we went in and we fixed it. And so when that was done, we had just come off of Beetlejuice, and they're like, "Hey kids, come on, let's go in and talk about Batman." And I turned to Marty and I go, "Listen, Beetlejuice was a comedy, and comedy's like your bailiwick. This is superheroes. This is comics. This is mine. So when we do Batman, okay, I need you to just step back, let me take front chair because I'm going to do Batman." And then we got the offer to do X-Men, and I'm like, "Hey, Marty, why don't you take Batman?"
So with Batman then, with getting the gig, when you started writing, did you read a lot of Batman as well as a kid, or was it solely X-Men that you grew up on?
Oh my God. I was voracious on all this stuff. I used to watch the Batman cartoons when I was a kid, like this filmation stuff, all the really silly stuff they were doing in the 60s. I watched Adam West from the word go. I read a lot of the comics. I love Batman. Just love Batman. I mean, he's just great.
Yeah.
And we were invited to come in and talk about the show. And what happened first was we worked with three great story editors. There were three story editors in charge of Batman. And so Alan Burnett was the Uber producer, and he hired Paul Dini. No, I think Paul Dini may have been there before, from the get-go, but he brought in people like Michael Reeves, and he brought in Marty Pasco. And so we were invited to come in and talk to Marty. And Marty had story edited an episode called "If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich?" And it was a Riddler story.
The first one, yeah.
It was the first one. And David Wise wrote it, and the two of them together came up with this. And David Wise would always, like the two of them would hang out together. And, they always talk about, the world and, whatever. And it's like,
oh, that sounds like so much conversation I want to hear, like if I was a fly on the wall. Because talking about the world.
But a refrain they would always have was, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? And Brilliant. So that became the episode. That became the episode title. But it introduced the Riddler as a computer criminal, which was a whole new dealio.
Yeah.
And so we were invited to come in and do a sequel to that episode. And so back then they had this new thing called virtual reality. And I had just read about it in the LA Times. And it was so new, people just didn't know about it. It was this whole kind of new thing.
Yeah, I mean, watching that episode now, you can see that technology in your own living room. But back then, I was watching it and I was like, this is way ahead of its time. How immersive it was in the world. And the rules that you created in the VR world is actually quite prevalent to today. And the same rules apply to what is real and what's not and how immersed you can be. I was really impressed at how ahead of its time the episode was.
What impressed me was we were like, okay, the Batman animated series is a very stylized universe. So how do you show them going from that stylized universe into a stylized universe and make people see that these are two different places? And the way that they did that by just having the monochromic, red and black, and having things squared off, like you look at Batman's ears and they're squared off almost like they're computer pixelated or something. Anyway, they did the most incredible job creating this computer world. But what we did was we pitched a virtual reality story. It's like, why doesn't the Riddler's a computer criminal? Why doesn't he trap Batman in virtual reality and make that the story?
I loved how also you put in he wanted to erase the history of Edward Nygma ever existing because of being an ashamed, fired employee and all of the history that went into his character that is a private matter to him, right? He's like, no, that's not, I want that to be a riddle. I want my own history to be a riddle. So I love that as he sends these goons to go and destroy the hard copies at the DMV, but he has to leave clues for Batman because he can't help but be addicted to the riddle of as much as I can get away with this, I kind of want to have some fun and play a game with Batman whilst I do it, which I love. It's so Riddler.
He needs to have a challenge. There was a movie called Little Man Tate about a math savant that Jodie Foster directed. And there was a character in it called the Math Magician. And he was like Mr. Math. And, they would give him math problems and he would just stand there in a cape and a top hat in front of the room. And he would just answer these questions. And finally he goes, won't somebody challenge me? And then little man Tate comes up and kicks his ass. And suddenly he's like, I'm not happy now. So, but that was Marty's take on the Riddler. He's like, won't somebody challenge me? And so that's the thing. The reason he gives the clues is because he knows he's unbeatable. And he's basically saying, hey, yo, cops. Hey, yo, Batman. I can outthink everybody. And I'm the kind of person who stays up at night thinking about things that most ordinary people don't think about. And one night I was up and I was thinking, this is years before the Batman animated series, here's the Riddler. what do you do with the Riddler to punish him? You can't put him in Arkham Asylum because he's not crazy. He's a career criminal. That's different. So you put him in jail. You put him in a prison. No, he's a puzzle master. A cell is a puzzle. He'll get out anytime he wants to. He loved being in prison. You know, the whole Shawshank Redemption thing? That's Saturday afternoon for him.
Yeah.
His whole dealio would be like, well, how many times can I escape and come back without him even noticing? So how do you punish the Riddler? And the way that you punish him is you take away the only thing that matters to him, and that's his intellect. So at the end of the episode, we turned his brain into tapioca.
Yeah.
That's how you punish the Riddler. I want to make this clear. Marty was first chair in that episode. It's very much his victory. It's very much his episode. I give credit where credit is due, but to my discredit, I also take credit where credit is due. So the idea of Edward Nygma getting rid of his existence and all the computers and getting rid of the hard copies, that was taken from a screenplay that I had written. I wrote a computer screenplay about a missing computer hacker and a private investigator who's going to go after him. And at one point, the hacker decides, okay, I'm going to throw this guy off my trail. I'm going to make him cease to exist. And so suddenly his driver's license is invalid. His credit cards don't work. Everything about him, if you try to find him online, is gone. And so, his existence was erased. And so I figured, the Riddler would probably want to make himself the ultimate riddle, the ultimate enigma. So he would want to erase any evidence that he exists, so that he becomes this kind of phantom person, this sort of human riddle, this sort of human mystery. He'd need to get rid of the hard copies too, so he would go to places like the DMV and get rid of the hard copies. And so Marty realized DMV are all Roman numerals. And so he came up with riddles involving Roman numerals. By the way, all of the riddles, every riddle was Marty's. I don't do riddles.
Okay, good to know.
I never write a Riddler episode on my own, ever, because I can't do the riddle stuff. And the riddle stuff, Marty's made out of that stuff. His whole thinking, and so he came up with these great riddles. Also, all the actions that happened, whereas I said, hey, he goes down to the DMV, and okay, so all the stuff going on outside with the computerized cars trying to run down Batman and stuff, all those action sequences and everything, all Marty. All the shit going on in the cyber world, that's all Marty. So I can take credit for some fundamental things because the two of us sat down and structured the story together.
Sure.
And cannibalized a screenplay that I wrote, but that episode is very much Marty's mystery. And if you enjoy that episode, it's because of what Marty brought to it.
The bones of your screenplay are in there, as you said, and that's a fundamental part of the episode with this hacker that's obviously trying to throw someone off his scent while trying to erase things. That's a big part of the episode, which I really liked. Like I said, I really liked how the Riddler was trying to make his own existence a riddle to everybody else, right? Like erase his history.
That first scene at the ATM was the first scene from my screenplay. But the difference is that in my screenplay, this guy's like, hey, what's going on with the stupid ATM? Fuck the stupid ATM. And suddenly the stupid ATM starts spitting money at him. And he's like, oh my God, this is fantastic. But of course, the Riddler wouldn't do that. What the Riddler would do is he'd make a joke in your face, and then he would make your balance go down to zero.
Yeah. I love that. That was great. That was really good.
The opening gag was the opening gag in my screenplay. By the way, how much did John Glover hit that character out of the park?
I cannot stress how much I love his Riddler performance. He is absolutely incredible. What I love about his Riddler is that as much as I love different interpretations, and like Batman 66 obviously is one interpretation, Frank Gorshin did a great job as this like eccentric, like giggly, like almost like a puppet Riddler, right? Like he's on like strings, like a marionette. But I adore like a very intelligent, well-dressed, sinister genius.
Yeah, he is a cerebral character. Frank Gorshin played the character maniacally, and a friend of mine pointed out his performance as the Riddler was the perfect Joker.
Well, it influenced Mark Hamill.
Well, there you go. So here's the thing. In Batman and Robin, No, in Batman Forever, they had the Riddler, and the performance was based on Frank Gorshin, obviously.
100%.
And what he was doing was based on the animated series. So all that virtual reality stuff, that came from our episode. And
That's what I wanted to ask you, if you noticed that, because I thought that too.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. At the end of the episode, they turn his brain into tapioca. Interesting. The writer in the movie said that as research, he goes, because he did the shark movie once, and he spoke afterwards, and he goes, well, I love working in an industry where I can sit down and watch Batman cartoons, and it's research. And afterwards, I go, well, I wrote the Riddler episode. He goes, oh, well, I didn't really, watch the show. Backpedals like a motherfucker.
But that's what the 90s, like all the cartoons, that's what they moved into the superhero movie like genre that we know now. Like if Spider-Man, right? Spider-Man the animated series, there are so many elements from that series that are used in Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. It's like they used the exact scripts at one point, and same with X-Men the animated series. There are so many elements of that cartoon that they took storylines and bits from and put into those first three movies. It's crazy.
Well, yeah, but a lot of the source material, a lot of the X-Men animated series was based on the source material. So it really is, it's like the snake eating its own tail. So, yeah, they're influenced by what we were doing, but we were influenced by them. That being said, if you look at what they did in those two Batman movies that Joel Schumacher did, in Batman Forever, the way they got rid of the Riddler was they turned his brain into tapioca. So they owe Marty and I a big thank you, because all of the computer stuff they did was based on what we did. What they did with Two-Face at the end, where Batman throws all the coins in the air, and so he doesn't know what to do because he can't find his coin, that came right from Michael Reeves.
Yeah, it did.
So they owe Michael Reeves a big thank you.
Second Chance, the name of that episode, is a great episode.
Yeah, and then for Batman and Robin, if you look at who Mr. Freeze is in terms of his wife and everything else, that's all Paul Dini.
Yep.
If you look at Poison Ivy and the fact that she's like an eco-terrorist, that's Paul Dini.
Yeah.
So they owe Paul Dini a huge debt of gratitude for that movie. By the way, how stupid was it that in Batman Forever, they spend a lot of time giving an origin to the Riddler, who doesn't need an origin. He's a given, okay? He's a maniac who likes puzzles. Okay, got it. And they introduce a really wonderfully complex villain in Two-Face, and his origin is done in one shot.
Yeah, on the TV.
And he's the guy you spend 20 minutes showing how he became who he is, because he's the guy with the story. But no, they give the story to this character who absolutely, positively doesn't need an explanation.
Yeah, you're so right.
Do we need to know how someone becomes the Riddler?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and even in If You're So Smart, Why You're Rich, the Riddler's origin's done very quickly, right? So they can just get into it. And I know you've got 22 minutes to compete with writing a script, but regardless of that, you don't need to tell a lot of story. Whereas Two-Face, he's got two parts to his origin in the animated series, because there's so much to that character. And look at all the comics and where he's come from, like The Long Halloween. There's an amazing Harvey Dent to Two-Face story in that book. Yeah, it's interesting because all of these movies that we're talking about all have elements that we like about Batman that are in there, but it doesn't stick the landing. But the animated series, as you said at the beginning of this, is the definitive version. And you're so right. And it's why it's stood the test of time and why people are still watching it. It's why people are doing podcasts about it and talking about it still, because they just nail it perfectly. And not only retell stories from their comic days, but also they've come up with new characters and new stories as well that have really stood the test of time.
Well, they also greatly benefit from the fact that they were able to do so many of them. Yeah. Because you had 95 stories, you had 95 opportunities to explore different facets of the characters and of Batman himself. So whereas the movies give you one single 2-hour experience every couple of years, we had the luxury of time of having to tell so many different stories. And when you have to tell so many stories, when you have so many episode slots to fill, it presents you with an opportunity to explore, and that's where Paul Dini's genius in the series was. He would explore the psychology of these characters, you know.
Well, let's talk about Paul Dini real quick, because you worked on Lock Up, right? You co-wrote Lock Up, which is a Paul Dini creation. What can you tell us about working on that episode? With what did Paul Dini give you notes? Like, what was the story? What did you add to the script itself? Where were you, and where was Dini, and where was Marty, I suppose, in that whole process?
I'll give you chapter and verse on it. That's the episode that I feel is the most me, because Marty did the first two episodes. He wrote What Is Reality and his Silicon Soul. I had written a bunch of episodes of X-Men. He had written Batman, and we said, "Hey, why don't we switch?" And so he wrote a 2-part episode of X-Men where they're in the Savage Land, and it's a wonderful story. In the meantime, I took the Batman story, and so we went in and we had a meeting with Paul Dini. And Paul Dini's like, "Hey, we want you to write an episode for us." And he goes, "Okay, here's the story. At Arkham Asylum, they have a guard who can keep everybody inside, only he's insane. And now Batman has to stop him." And we're like, "That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant." So we came up with, the structure of the story, and I wanted to call the character Deadbolt.
It's a good name, man. I like that name.
I wanted to call him Deadbolt, and I'm like, "Paul, can we call him Deadbolt?" And he's like, "Well, I'll think about it." And then I called him a few days later. "Hey, can we call him Deadbolt?" And he's like, "No, the name of the character is Lockup." And I'm like, "All right, I'm not going to fight you on the point. I think Deadbolt's a much better name."
I agree. It's a better sounding name. It sounds more sinister. It plays into his obsession with locks and locking people up, and how he's talented at doing that. Shit, man, I kind of like Deadbolt a bit more, just personally speaking.
And the episode is called Lockup. My title was Cage Without a Key.
That's pretty good too.
That and that line is in the episode, but the idea is that this guy's mind is a cage without a key. He's right. Okay. So I based the character. Can you tell what character that's based on? What his performance, not his performance, but the character himself. What influenced that character?
No, I can't.
He's based on a movie character. He isn't based on him, but he's largely inspired, particularly thematically, by him. Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver.
Oh, my God. My God, that makes so much sense now. Wow,
and there's a scene where he's looking at a TV set, and he just pushes it over. And that comes from Taxi Driver, where he's watching TV and he's got a gun. I don't remember if it was a gun or if he's pointing his finger like a gun, but he's pointing a gun at the TV and tipping the TV with his foot, and then he just pushes it over and it explodes.
Yeah,
like, I gotta use that. So he's basically Travis Bickle. The idea of using a prison ship.
Mm.
You know where that came from?
No.
Great Expectations.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
They had these ships called the Hulks, and they were using them as floating prisons. And I'm like, I gotta use that someday.
I like all of this. It's just like a checklist where you're like, okay, yeah, I've got to use that. I've got to use that. I mean, that's what good writers do, to be honest with you, is they're influenced by pieces of work, and they're like, I want to have that in mind, but they tweak it and they change it to make it their own. I like it.
And I also like the idea of Batman fighting in a sinking ship. I'm like, oh, we got to do this. We got to do this. And there's this shot at the end where they're facing each other and the ship is going down, and
they're on the hull. Yeah, it's great.
And I based that the imagery there is based on The Dark Knight Returns. It's like I really feel like that. But here's what I love about the episode is people think Batman is driven by a need for revenge and the need to take it out on these bad guys. He's out there to beat the shit out of bad guys and throw them in jail. And over time, he becomes a more and more violent, grim, vengeful. He's the voice of vengeance. He is a vengeance demon. And I'm like, that's not Batman. That's not my Batman. It isn't. So in this episode, you see somebody who is what people think of when they think of Batman.
Yeah, of
Being
course.
a psychotic, violent, he's out there to punish crime. And in that episode, you see that Bruce Wayne is actually a compassionate person.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to beat these guys up. He has empathy for them. He if he had his druthers, they would all be better. They would all get better.
Yeah.
He's as violent as he needs to be. You know what? He's not vindictive. He's not punitive. He is practical. And what he's trying to do is make the world safer for people. And toward that end, well, he's in situations where violence is necessary. I mean, he gets in fights, but he doesn't walk into a bar looking for a fight. Okay? Heroes always try to find the least violent way to deal with things. It's what they're pushed into. It's how they get pushed into a corner and what they do once they're pushed there. But they don't go in looking for a fight. You know who goes in looking for a fight? Wolverine.
Mm.
Wolverine, and that's my difference with Hugh Jackman is, his version, he's not looking for a fight. John Byrne's Wolverine loves a good scrap. And he says over and over, "Oh, good, thank God! Finally, something I can put my claws into."
Yeah,
he's looking for a fight, but heroes don't do that. And Batman is a great hero. And so, what I did in the episode was, okay, this is who you think Batman is, and this is who Batman really is. And the genius in the episode is that if you look at Lockup's costume, it mirrors Batman's. It's the same colors. He's wearing blue and black and gray with a little bit of yellow in it. And if you look at the two of them together, it's like, oh my God, they're counterparts.
The only thing on Lockup's face that you can see are his eyes, whereas the thing on Batman is you can see his jaw, you can't see his eyes. It's almost like the mask is reversed too, right? And what they show and what they don't show.
Yeah, in a way, yeah, I'd agree with that, yeah. But at one point, Lockup says, "You and I are the same." And Batman points out exactly why they're not the same.
Yeah, I love that line.
The difference between the person everyone thinks Batman is. And they've gotten Batman wrong ever since The Dark Knight, because comics became dark and grim, and everybody did this race to the bottom with Batman to say, well, how can we make him into the most violent leg breaker ever? And I'm like, no, that's not who Batman is, not to me. So anyway, that episode, I love that episode because it was an opportunity in hindsight, because I don't know that we set out to do this, but what we did in retrospect was we defined Batman perfectly by showing who he isn't. And he's not the person that you think he is, because the person that you think he is Lockup. So,
yeah, I love that, because all of his villains, they're obviously always some type of reflection of what Bruce Wayne could have been, right? Like, that's the whole idea. But this one is a very particular one because it's the law, which I really like. I mean, I guess the closest before that is Harvey Dent, but he deals with courtroom stuff. This is a guy that literally wants to police the world, which is what an over-accentuated Batman could want to do, right? Is just like... Yeah. Just control the world through force and control.
He's Batman taken to his logical into illogical conclusion.
Yeah, I really like that. Well, he's sadly, obviously, only one episode for Lockup, or Deadbolt, which I now kind of want to call him. But sadly, only one episode for the animated series. But he is featured in the comics now.
He was the first character to be transitioned over to comics. He transitioned before Harley Quinn did.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
How goofy is that?
Yeah, I know. And then obviously look at Harley Quinn, and then look at where Lockup is, and obviously one is really well known and one isn't. But I really
I think you're forgetting all those great Lockup movies that we had.
I can't wait to see that in the next Batman movie. I would dig if they threw in Lockup as like just a quick cameo character in a story, if they can make it work. I think it'd be great. He's a great character. He's a lot of fun.
You know what Paul Dini wanted to do at one point? He wanted to introduce Killer Moth into the animated series.
Interesting.
He wanted to have, like, there's a bank robbery, and it's like, you will all kneel before Killer Moth. And then Batman comes in and just decks him. And he goes, Killer Moth. What next?
I
And he
like
was,
that though.
yeah,
It's like,
but he was told he couldn't do it because Killer Moth has a lot of fans out there, and that's kind of a slap in the face to them. But
right.
how great would that be?
That would be good. I mean, there's some Paul Dini episodes like this one where it's called "Make 'Em Laugh," and it's about the Joker rigging a stand-up comedy contest, and he basically poisons all these comedians' minds, and one of them believes that he's the condiment king, right? And he's got like ketchup and mustard guns. He's got like a dill pickle hat on. He's a complete loser villain. Throwaway. Like when Batman meets him, he's like, now listen, mustard man, and like punches him in the stomach, right? So maybe that's where Paul Dini got to have like that type of scenario. It's obviously
Remember
not the same.
Rat? Was that the episode with the
Same
Rat?
episode, yeah, same episode, right? Like that's where he got to kind of have fun with that. Granted, it's not existing DC characters, but that could have been cool, and
But
maybe
that
that's
was
what.
really, really goddamn funny. The Pack Rat. It's like he opens this box with a diamond necklace in it, and he throws the diamond over his shoulder, and he's holding this box as this treasure. I am the Pack Rat.
I love it.
This will be useful to me.
I would love to see these characters come back, and like empty your pockets. Now, I don't want your jewelry and your money. I want like your lint and all these other things, your loose buttons. I love that.
That's Paul Dini's genius. I mean, he would come up with. He was wonderful at dealing with the psychology of the characters, but also he would just come up with this off the wall shit. I mean, I used to tell people I hate Paul Dini. He makes it look so easy. And then it got back to Paul Dini that Bob Skir said, Bob Skir hates you. And I'm like, no. I hate you because it makes you look so easy. That's not the same thing.
Well, speaking of delving into the psychology of the characters, one episode which of the three that you did that really delves into the psychology of what it means to be Batman, in my opinion, and a standout episode of this series, especially upon a few rewatches. As I get older, I appreciate it even more as I watch it over and over again throughout the years, is his Silicon Soul. I love it because it really depicts who Batman is as a person, right? Like even a replicant, a robot that is that ultimately is programmed to like destroy the world, still has enough of Batman's like core drive to not kill people, and it goes against his own programming that he literally can't handle it. And I just love that as an ending. So yeah, talk me through that, like with coming up with that episode. I know you said that it was you and Marty kind of 50-50 on that, but yeah, like what was that like writing that episode?
Well, first of all, it was a sequel to a two-parter about a robot named Hardak. And so we were brought in to do a sequel. I want to start by talking about the title, His Silicon Soul.
Mm-hmm.
You know where that title comes from?
I don't know.
It comes from a Twilight Zone episode from around 1988, written by Alan Brennert, called Her Pilgrim Soul.
Okay.
And I loved that title so much. It just always stayed with me. And so it became His Silicon Soul, because the premise of the episode ultimately was, if you have this robot and it develops a conscience and it is willing to sacrifice itself, does it have a soul? The final line of the episode in the script is, it had a soul, Alfred, a soul of silicon, but a soul nonetheless.
Yeah.
And the network said, you can't do that. You can't say it has a soul, because it's kind of like you can't mention God or religion in these shows.
Sure.
Well, talking about a robot having a soul kind of crosses into religious territory. And so BS&P was not comfortable with that. They said, you need to change this line. And the compromise was, it got turned into a question. Do you think it had a soul, Alfred? A soul of silicon, but a soul nonetheless?
Right.
And to me, like, okay, Michael Reeves was the story editor, and he hated that change. Hated that change. And I loved the change because it's better as a question.
Yeah.
And if you end it on a question, then that means the audience is left with something that they need to think about. Because it's up to them to answer the question. And I absolutely love that. If I could have phrased it as a question to begin with, I probably would have done it if I thought of it. It's like, hey, but the idea was that this thing became so much like Batman that it thought it was Batman, and Batman couldn't take a life. And once he thought he took a life, he had no choice but to terminate his own existence. That's definitive on Batman's part.
Absolutely.
When we were first given the episode, okay, backing up, they did a 2-part story called Heart of Steel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch the episodes closely, if you watch the second part, they are very clearly leading up to they were going to have a Bruce Wayne duplicate, and then it just doesn't happen. It's like, I thought we were heading in that direction, and the episode's over. What happened? And what happened was they had this thought, and then they just kind of abandoned it. It's like, well, we're not going to do that. And I don't remember if they were going to do it as a third episode or if it was just going to be the second half of the second episode, but they were going to do this. And it's obviously like, have a big fight between Batman and a duplicate Bruce Wayne, or, because it has the brain of Bruce Wayne, it becomes Batman. I don't know what they were thinking they were going to do, but they didn't do it. But they were leading up to it. They called us in like, hey, we did this episode about robots. Do you want to come in and do a robot Batman episode? And the first thought that we had was, okay, we open up in a warehouse and Batman comes out and he gets shot in the chest and these wires come out and he goes back to the Batcave and says to Alfred, what haven't you been telling me?
Right. Okay.
And I loved that image. I love that idea. I just love that whole thing.
And mostly that's what happens in the episode. Besides, instead of what have you not been telling me, it's more like what's happened to me, and that, I mean, there's such graphic imagery in this episode, even for this show, which obviously kind of pushed the bar with what you can show. But I mean, first of all, a guy laying into Batman with a bunch of bullets, right? Like firing into his chest. You don't see it, but he is firing a gun at him. And then Batman looking down, and obviously his wires are everywhere. That's graphic in itself. It's the performance that Kevin Conroy gives in this as well, which is just, we haven't even spoken about Kevin Conroy and how much of an amazing Batman he was. And especially in this episode, it's the tortured robot voice that he does such an amazing job at, especially when he's begging Alfred to be like, help me, and what's going on, and like something's happened and I need your help. I feel if I was Alfred, I'd be like, I'm not sure if you actually are the real Bruce Wayne or not, because you sound so scared and authentic. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, okay, before we move on any further, this series I think of as the definitive Batman series and the definitive portrayal of Batman. Kevin Conroy, I mean, forget about it. He's Batman.
Yeah.
There's no other Batman. He is fucking Batman.
Absolutely.
You listen to his voice, you listen to the authority he has as Batman, and he just has this gravitas to him. And then you hear his Bruce Wayne voice when he's putting on a Bruce Wayne voice for other people. Because when he's Bruce Wayne with Alfred, he's got the Batman voice. So when he's like being mild, the mild Bruce Wayne, like that's the mask.
Yeah, absolutely. He always said that. Yeah.
Did he ever win an Emmy for that? He probably didn't. He's going to live forever as Batman. He is absolutely fantastic. And the same way that I'm sorry to everybody who did brilliant work as the Joker, but there is Mark Hamill. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
Yeah, I mean, as we've done this show, before we even started the show, my brother and I always said that Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, those are the definitive voices of those characters. But as we've done this show, we've delved back into these episodes, it turns out that all the voice actors are they are the definitive voices of these characters. No one has done it better. Everybody in this show brought their A game, from voice actors to producers to the writers. You guys, like, to bring the knowledge and the love for this character in this world, and to give us 22 minutes of pure entertainment as kids, and not treat us as kids. Like when I was watching this, you know, back when it started when I was 6 years old. I started watching around that time, and obviously, as I got older, I continued to watch as it went on, and then I would go back and I'd rewatch it, and I'd learn so much from it. And you never treated us as children, especially this Silicon Soul episode. It has the fundamentals that make Batman who he is in it. And you're not like, hey, kid, we're going to do this, but there's going to be silliness to it, and it's going to be like jokey, and don't worry, and the robot's not going to be scary. The robot is scary. Even now when I watch it, like when he pulls off his face and there's this noise that Kevin Conroy makes that it just sounds like pure torture. But now, as I'm like, even as an adult, like those themes and everything, that is the reason that the show has lasted so long throughout time, is because you didn't treat us like fucking children, man. You treated us like people like, okay, you're going to be able to get this, and this is the story that we want to tell.
I've always believed in writing up to the audience, not writing down to the audience. I always figured if you write over the audience's head, they will come up to meet you and they will be glad to be asked to do so. And so we never wrote down to them. I wrote the development to X-Men Evolution. I wrote the Bible. You know, Marty and I officially worked together. He was on Action Man at the time, and the greatest labor of love I've ever done was the Bible to X-Men Evolution. And I wanted to treat the characters so seriously, and it was so different from the other X-Men series. Being a mutant was like being an African American in pre-civil rights America. That's what the premise of X-Men, the animated series, was. What we were going for in X-Men Evolution was being a mutant. You get your mutant powers when you reach puberty, and you suddenly realize you're different from everybody else. And if everybody realizes who you really are, they're going to reject you. They're going to call you a freak. They're going to hate you. So the thing that gives you power is also the thing that marks you as an outsider. That's being a mutant. That's being a teenager. So being a mutant was a metaphor for being a teenager, which is why it was perfect that we said it in high school and made them teenagers, as they initially were in the comics. You know, this was very much a back to the egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
What we kept being told by the network was, well, yeah, but our focus groups show that our 7-year-old audience. Now, remember that our 7-year-old audience, and by the time I heard that for the 5th time, I'm like, listen, I don't write for 7-year-olds. I don't. I write for one person. I write for me. So I'm really sorry, but what you got to understand is when we write this show, we're not going to be writing based on focus groups. And, you know, I'm not going to try and figure out what 7-year-olds want. I'm going to write stories that interest me because I love the X-Men, and my love will translate to the audience. If I'm right, because I've written shows that are preschool shows, but I don't write down to 3-year-olds. I write stories that I think are interesting, and I write at the top of my intelligence in a way that will not lose my audience. And there is a difference. I'm not catering to them. I'm making sure we don't lose them.
Yeah.
And so I think for Batman, it's the same thing. The kind of dark themes you're talking about, the kind of maturity you're talking about, it goes back to the conversation I had with Marty. Are we going to fight about these stories because they matter? And are we going to have the attitude that good enough is never going to be good enough, that we have to up our game on everything because these stories matter? And what was beautiful about Batman was that for the first time ever, you had a Batman series that was being done not by professional cartoon writers, but by fans, by people who were as passionate about these characters. No one took these jobs because it was a chance to oh, good, I get to write a script. You know, this is a job. It's like, no, everybody who was there, it was a labor of love. Every single writer, every single artist, all the directors, everybody fucking loved these characters with a passion that came through. And they had absolute reverence for the kinds of things that Denny O'Neil brought to the character when they made him a much more mature character. You know, and Neil Adams, like the two of them, I think, really brought Batman into adulthood. like after you read the Ra's al Ghul issues and the Man Bat issues and things like that, you were never going back to Adam West again. All the silliness that was going on from the 50s and the 60s with Batman and Robin on the moon with these, goldfish bowls on their heads. And then the composite Superman, who's half Superman and half Batman and what? Anyway, all that silliness is out the window. Suddenly you're dealing with really, serious stories, a serious take on the character. And then you have people like Len Wein coming in and they're like really good detective stories. And you have people like, Marshall Rogers and Steve Englehart doing, issues where it's like, okay, this is a Batman being written by smart people and they're writing for a smart audience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. And with going back to Silicon Soul for a second, because of the adult nature of that episode, I would say, really adult themes, but the core of Batman, as I've said, it's really resonated with a lot of fans. And I don't know if you've seen, but there's a new toy line out for Batman the Animated Series. They've been making all new action figures from the show for like a modern day audience, right? And your duplicate Batman is an action figure. If you can see right there, you can replace the head. You can see his guts are, half robot face. There's another look at it there. He's even got the sword that he uses in the Batcave there. And I love this so much. There's even a pop figure of it as well.
Is there?
Yeah,
no.
Yeah.
No.
You obviously love the pops.
God. I'm a Funko. What is it called? What number is it?
They call him Batman Robot. That's what they call him.
All right. It's a 193 Batman Robot. I love the episode very much. We catch up with Carl Rossum.
We do, yeah. Voiced by I've forgotten his name. That's terrible. But he's in loads of Western.
William Sanderson.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was in Deadwood. He was great in that series, and he's been in other
Blade Runner. That's why we used him.
He's in Blade Runner, yes.
Sebastian in Blade Runner. That's why we used him. I love the idea of him being a farmer because it's like, okay, you know what? I don't try to create life now. I just grow it.
That's great. I love that.
The idea that he's leaving the cybernetics behind and going for the organics. But what's perfect about it is that meanwhile he has robots working the farm.
Yeah, can't help himself.
How would a guy like this, if he was going to have a farm, how would he run it? Well, the tractors would have little antennas on it, and they run themselves. There's a bit in it where they're in a greenhouse, and all the glass comes down and rains on Batman. And isn't Rossum in there as well?
Rossum, Batman, and Robot Batman, yeah.
And Robot Batman. Okay, so that was lifted from a movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, every time you say this, you're baiting me where I'm going to go, what movie was it?
There was a movie in the early 90s around the same time called The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Oh, I've heard of it. I've not seen it.
It's one of these Cape Fear kind of movies where you have, one character haunting another character to subvert their entire lives. And so in it, you have, and I forget who the actors are, it was a Cape Fear movie, and it was really good. And there's one scene where somebody is in a greenhouse, and this woman murders her by making all the glass rain down on her. I've never seen a death quite like that in a movie. It was so horrific. I'm like, oh, we got to use this.
in a cartoon. I love it.
I got to use this in a cartoon. Hey, kids, look at this.
I saw this in an R-rated movie once.
Yeah, exactly.
That's brilliant.
So that's like a lot of stuff, you lift from other places. Only God creates ex nihilo, out of nothing. The rest of us, we use this stuff around us. And it isn't like I run around saying, hey, what can I steal? What can I steal? But there are certain things where it's like, that can be useful. Or, you regret expectations in ninth grade and you're bored out of your fucking skull. But here are these things called the Hulks, these big prison ships. That's interesting to me. And so, things percolate and things, So, I mean, I don't run around going to the movies, looking for things to grab. But sometimes there are things that are just too good not to recycle. And sometimes there are things that are they're just too cool to say, you know what, nobody's seen the Hand That Rocks the Cradle. People are going to see Batman. People are going to appreciate this. So,
I mean, yeah, and if I ever saw like a movie or a TV show and the hero is fighting another guy on a sinking prison ship, I'm going to be like, this is from Batman, even though obviously it's referenced before that, but that's what's going to resonate with me, right? And I'm going to be like, you stole this from Batman the Animated Series. Is there anything that you guys wrote in these 3 scripts that didn't make the cutting room floor? Any scenes that you remember that you thought like, oh, that would be good, but just didn't make the 22-minute cut?
there was Bruce Weitz did the voice of Lockup. And when he spoke really slowly. And everything he said had gravity and gravitas because he brought such weight to everything. And so because he spoke so slowly, I'm not sure if this is factual or not, but it feels like, okay, we lost a minute or 2 in the episode. There was a gag we were going to do where Robin is looking around in Lyle Bolton's apartment, and that's where he finds the clue that leads them to the ship.
Right.
But he's looking through the apartment, and at one point he goes into the closet, and the door slams shut and locks. And he goes, oh, great. I can see the headline tomorrow. Boy Wonder outwitted by closet.
That's good. I like that.
That didn't happen. I think it's an unnecessary beat, right?
Sure, but still a fun little line that would happen. And I like that. Like there's a lock on everything in Lockup's house. That's great. That's cool.
I absolutely love the line that I came up with for Robin when they realize who Lockup is and that he's the guy that Bruce Wayne brought into to Arkham Asylum.
I know exactly what you're going to say because he has a lot of sass in this episode.
What's the line?
The line is, I forget the exact line, but basically another villain brought to Gotham by the Wayne Foundation.
Yes.
And Batman looks at him like, you son of a bitch. You know, like he gives him a look like, what did you just say? Yeah. And he's like, kidding. I'm just kidding around. Like, oh, I've just hit a button. I pushed a button there. You know, he's like, oh, I'm just upset.
That's a line. A lot of lines come about because he's just having conversations with people. So when Marty and I were, coming up with Lockup, he's brought in by Bruce Wayne. He funds this guy. So it's like, okay. And he's another villain made possible by a grant and then I go, oh, wait, no, we got to use that. Do you recognize that phrase?
No, I don't.
That phrase actually comes from public television in America. They have shows like Channel 13 has like Sesame Street, and they have like Nova. And so,
so they say like brought to you by, and then whoever's like sponsoring it. Is that what it is?
Well, yeah, but brought to you by is like on commercial television where the shows are run by advertising. But a lot of the shows on public television are funded by viewer subscriptions because people send money to PBS. It's why every 6 months they come out and say they have these pledge drives, right? Like, hey, send us money. But a lot of the programming is done by corporations as grants, as like tax write-offs or whatever. So it's like Nova is brought to you by the Chubb Group.
Right.
I don't know what Chubb Group does, but they fund a lot of shows. And so yeah, that's where that line came from. But I just once I said that out loud, I'm like, oh my God, we got to give this to Robin.
Yeah, it was a great line.
There was a scene that I wanted to do in What is Reality? I think this is one of the first times that we see Commissioner Gordon and Robin alone together.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, you don't usually see them alone.
Tends to be kind of irreverent in the series. Like, he gives Batman a certain amount of, he kind of sticks it to Batman a couple of times,
Sure, he's a teenager, right? Like he's going to have...
he's not being mean. He's being sassy enough to be clever.
Yeah.
So I had some point where I wanted to give Robin a moment where he's kind of a little sassy with Commissioner Gordon. Like, he says something really kind of offhand. And Commissioner Gordon basically grabs him and says, listen, I'm putting a lot of trust in you. So, don't be a wise ass with me. My neck is on the line. It's a wonderful moment, but, they didn't want to play that moment. And I totally get it because, it makes them both seem a little like assholes.
Yeah, and without Batman there to be like a parent in that situation, right? To like break it up or whatever. I mean, Robin does have quite a bit of sass in this episode. There, I can't remember what the other line was, but I was like, "Oh, Robin's 2 for 2 on the sass meter in this episode." When I watched it, he like has jabs at characters like Gordon or Batman, which he usually doesn't. But I found that really interesting. So yeah, now I know.
I just like the idea of him being a little irreverent because he's young, because he's kind of, he's coming into his power. He's going to have an attitude, and you got to find a way to make him different from Batman because otherwise it becomes frickin' Frick.
Yeah,
and something that Marty and I realized. And Marty really, really, he's the one who really articulated this is if you're going to use Batman and Robin, split them up. The best use of them is to put them in different places because you get their different personalities and their different ways of handling things. And it doesn't become, the two of them playing off each other all the time. It becomes something better. So if you'll notice in the episodes that we did, when both of them were there, they spend a lot of time not in the same room together and yet can interact. So in the virtual reality episode, Robin is always in contact with Batman, but they're not in the same place doing the same thing. And the same thing in Lockup where, Robin's out investigating and Batman's doing his investigation. And so we're having fun with each character and it doesn't feel at all redundant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point, actually. By separating them, you get to really explore more. Well, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, man. Like, I've learned so much from not just Batman, but just like the journey that writers had to take back then to stories about X-Men that I've never heard before. So it's been a real pleasure to have you, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. As you can tell, I love talking about this stuff because I just love this stuff. It's important to do things that you just love and are passionate about. Your brother is an illustrator. He's a comic artist.
Yeah, he's a comic book artist and writer. Yes,
and he does it because he loves it.
Yes.
So
right now he's under the gun with a lot of deadlines. So I don't know if he loves it as much right now, but yes, ultimately he does it. Yeah.
And that's the thing is, you have to, if you're gonna dedicate yourself to something, just find something that you're really passionate about and just put yourself into it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having this podcast. Thank you very much for having me on. And I'm hoping we get to talk again soon.
Yeah, I think what we'll do, especially because we'll get Will involved as well, when we come to one of these 3 episodes, because we review episodes on the show, we'd love to have you back on when we're talking about that particular episode and just focus on that and like delve into the detail, because we'll watch it before we sit down and chat and kind of get more stories from you, some extra details, things you might have remembered or forgotten about until you see it. But that would be awesome to have you back to review one of those episodes.
Terrific. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Well, thank you, Bob, for coming on, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
All right. See you then.